Hi, everybody, and welcome to Story Hour. If this is the first time uh, you're here, pull up a chair and sit back and enjoy. If you are a returning visitor, welcome back. We've been doing this, Laura and I, for about well over 4.5 years now. We've had hundreds of amazing writers through these virtual rooms. I started Story Hour in the very early days of the pandemic, which is a very weird, uncertain time. And my intent at that time was just to create a space for my writer friends and I to get together and share our work. And shortly after I kicked it off, I asked Laura to join me as co-host. And since then, man, it's just taken off. And it's been just quite a wild ride. And every week, Laura and I just uh, uh, um, sort of violently agree with each other on how fortunate we are to be able to keep doing this every week. Um, so we also want to thank SIFWA. We're the happy recipients of a SIFWA Givers Grant, which helps pay our Zoom fees and our hosting fees so that I don't have to do this out of pocket anymore, which is kind of nice. Um, so this week we are delighted to bring you Tara Campbell and Jean-Paul Garnier. And we're going to start the program tonight with Tara Campbell. Tara Campbell was a writer, a teacher, a Conbilio Fellow, and fiction co-editor at Barrel House magazine. She teaches flash fiction and speculative fiction, and she's the author of a novel, two hybrid collections of poetry and prose, and two short story collections. Her sixth book, City of Dancing Gargoyles, launched from Santa Fe Writers Project on September 3rd, which, according to my calendar, was just yesterday. You can find out more about Tara Campbell at www.taracampbell.com. Tara, welcome back and take it away.
All right. Thank you so much, Dan and Laura. And I am still celebrating today with my very special City of Dancing Gargoyles t-shirt. But because this is story hour and not excerpt hour, I'm going to be reading a story from a different publication. This is Midnight at the Organporium, out by feminist sci-fi press, Aqueduct Press. And I'll leap right in. This is kind of an origin myth of my own creation called The Legend of Fog. Long ago, before cell phones and cars, before villages and farming, before hunting and gathering, there was fog, and she was happy. She spent her days wandering through mountains and valleys, skimming rivers and lakes, swirling around the planet as she pleased. She loved rolling through forests, savoring the stroke of leaves and the scratch of branches and bark. She lingered over the ocean for hours while its white-capped waves tickled her belly. But her favorite thing was to move among all the animals of the earth. There were big ones with feathers and leathery skin, and small ones with fur that scurried around their feet. Some stretched their necks to graze in trees. Others swung their spiky tails and bashed each other. They laid eggs and fed what came out of them, or they spilled tiny copies of themselves directly out of their bodies. These creatures fascinated Fog, and she was sad when the fireballs came and everything changed. The little hairy creatures survived, but Fog missed the big ones. She missed the feel of their skins and horns as they moved through her, especially the ones who spread their large spiny wings high in the sky and sliced right through her. She was lonely for a long while, having to content herself with watching new mountains push up from the earth, idly scratching herself on a banyan or a thorn tree, with only the occasional excitement of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. The small furry creatures multiplied and changed, morphing bit by bit into ever more interesting things. Limbs became flippers or disappeared entirely. Tails grew or shrank or vanished. Animals decided to walk on two legs or stay on four or hang from trees or slip into and out of the oceans. Watching these transformations, she began to feel quietly happy once more, until one day everything changed again. Anubis arrived, and Shiva, and Zeus, and Odin, and Ishtar, and Quetzalcoatl, and Tano, and so many more. Creatures like her, not bound to earth or water, one by one they appeared, filling up the air through which she moved with their singing and dancing, fighting and loving, bearing children and killing them. Fog was at first alarmed, but she soon became intrigued with these new beings. She moved among them, sweeping against their backs and bellies, winding herself around their legs and claws. She began to test them, compressing herself into different solidities to match their manifestations, observing their reactions when they first perceived her as something more than an odd prickling against their skins. Many of them, Aphrodite, Bes, Astarte, Kama, and Rati, tangled themselves up into her and made love to her. Eventually, she gave birth to 2 daughters, Frost and Dew. Over time, Fog's new companions became gods. By the time it happened to Bacchus, she had learned to recognize the signs. He looked down toward the earth more often, began to preoccupy himself with the soil-bound animals she would come to know as mankind. Even as he embraced her and tasted her mist, he occasionally stopped and tipped his head as though hearing a far-off call. She knew when he'd visited the humans, could smell their musk on him, taste their wine on his skin, and she knew she would have to share him. One by one, Fog would come to share all of the gods with the humans who claimed them. Fog watched the various ways in which gods loved their humans. Some of them strafed the earth with their wrath, growing fat and arrogant on the meat of sacrifice. Others coddled their favorites with offspring and riches. A few were distant and aloof, leaving their humans to their own graces and follies. Many made love to their humans, whether they wished to or not. The more attention mankind demanded, the more peevish Fog grew. Her companions became too preoccupied with the earthbound beings to pay proper attention to her. She began to plague the humans, cloaking their eyes and stoking their fears. She hid prey from their arrows and bullets, hid land from their boats when they sailed. She bundled up the howling of wolves and the grunting of bears and the roaring of lions, carried the sounds in her thickness, and encircled cowering villagers with muffled, unknowable menace. But her interference angered the gods. They wanted no one else to hold sway over their humans. They could not banish Fog, but they withdrew from her, refusing her embraces and casting her away from their hearts. With no friends left in the air, she retreated to the earth with Frost and Dew. Fog consoled herself by showing her daughters the many things to taste and smell and feel on the surface. Her sadness melted into delight as she discovered her daughters' different natures. Dew fell in love with grass and trees, pressing herself against them blade by blade, leaf by leaf throughout the night. Her dislike of humans was even stronger than her mother's, and she fled when they woke at the first light of day. Frost was bolder, solidifying and clinging to everything in sight. She didn't fear humans. She even taunted them, hanging from their eyelashes and beards if it was cold enough. And if they ignored her for too long, she would wriggle through their fabric coverings to nibble on delicate fingers, noses, and toes. She wrapped herself around everything, only relenting when the sun made it too hot for her liking. Winter became their favorite season. Frost and Dew made a friend named Wind. No one knew where he came from. They laughed as they ran together through the trees, rattling empty nests and kicking dead leaves before them. Fog watched them gleefully swirl and paint windows and rooftops and fences and bushes and whole fields of dried corn stalks. The faster Wind ran, the colder it stayed, and the fewer people ventured outside. Fog was delighted until Fog noticed her daughter Frost lingering at a certain window pane. Wind and Dew teased her, but she persisted, building up nightly at one particular window of the castle of the King of Twain. Fog knew better than to ask, waiting instead until Frost left the window on a warm afternoon. Fog peeked through the glass and saw a young man sitting at a desk. He wore an elaborate crimson tunic edged in gold, a prince, likely. He was writing a letter, and when he looked up from the page, Fog felt a pang of loss. The youth's large eyes and full lips reminded her of Bacchus. The young man pushed back from his table and crossed his muscular legs. She could well understand her daughter's fascination with this man, but hoped it would not move beyond observation. She decided to watch this prince more carefully, for her daughter's safety, of course, she told herself. When Frost was at the window, which was often, Fog scrutinized the rest of his clan. She saw how the king leered at his son's brides and wheedled himself into their chambers while their husbands were hunting. How on other nights he would send for a poor young maid in the village, seducing her via messenger with promises of gold for her family and marriage to his youngest, unwed son. How his son remained unwed, despite all the hopeful village girls who visited the king's bed. The queen knew all of this, but instead of asserting herself like Hera, she meekly accepted things as they were. Watching this family, Fog often found herself missing the clarity of the gods, their open love and retribution, the uncloaked multiplicity of their hearts, the world she'd been frozen out of. When Fog could get a glimpse of the prince, he always seemed to be occupied with correspondence. He read and wrote long letters, running his fingers over them with a slight smile on his face. When he finished writing, he would seal his missives with wax and a kiss before calling a messenger to bring them out into the world. Fog followed the messenger once, trailing his horse as it galloped through fields, across rivers, and over hills. The letter traveled through several messengers' hands until it reached the lap of a young seamstress who lived in a cottage with her father and sisters. The father smiled proudly, the sisters giggled and clapped, and the seamstress put down her sewing and clasped the letter to her breast. Once she finished the letter, she carefully placed it in a box of identical papers and hugged her family. Fog didn't need to see any more. Indeed, by the time she got back to the castle, Frost was whirling around it in a rage. She crazed the windows with thick sheets of ice, froze the gutters, and caked the doors shut. Dew hovered helplessly by. Wind had long since rushed away. "Mother," Frost sobbed, "he's going to marry." She rushed up to Fog as though she'd had something to do with it. Fog bundled herself around her girl, caressing her and wiping chips of ice away from her cheeks. "We heard them," said Dew, "the prince and his father, arguing." "Arguing?" asked Fog. "Yes, we heard the king yelling and came to see why. That's when we heard the prince intends to ask the hand of some village girl in marriage. The king will not allow it because his son has been promised to the princess of Wix." "Daughter, perhaps it is for the best," she said. "From what I've observed of humans, deceit and unhappiness are all that come of marital union." The idea of marriage had always appalled Fog. Only one partner for the rest of one's days? And how could they know they were compatible if they hadn't yet made love? "Mother's right," Dew said. "Better that this fate befall some human princess than you." But Frost was inconsolable. She buried herself in her mother's softness and cried, her tears dropping shards of ice upon the earth. "Darling, it really is for the best. Yes, this prince has many talents and he is beautiful, but his father, the king, brings doom upon this house." "Mother," Frost sniffed, "you're simply angry that the gods have been so generous with these humans instead of paying attention to us." Fog bristled. "It is true that the gods should take more of an interest in their daughters." She released Frost and thinned herself to quell her anger. But that has nothing to do with it. This king flouts human rules as though above them and abuses the gifts his god gave him. He elevates himself, thinks of himself as a god, and eventually he and his clan will suffer his god's wrath. You're wrong, mother. Frost's voice sliced through her. You're just jealous of the god's love. But I refuse to live in bitterness. I'm going to win the prince's heart and take my rightful place at his side. She wiped the last ice chips from her cheeks and swirled away. Dew stretched herself uncertainly between Fog and the departing Frost. Look after her, said Fog, and with that, Dew trailed off after her sister. For a moment, Fog thought about following them and telling them everything she'd seen. The king's leering and wheedling, his false promises to village girls, his son's ignorance of their wives' acquiescence, the queen's spineless acceptance of it all. Such a clan with its overweening king, impotent men, and weak-willed women was no place for a daughter of hers. But she knew Frost was too angry to listen just then. Fog would soon discover, however, that Frost had not merely stormed off in a fit of anger. Had she known of her daughter's plan, she probably would have intervened to save the Princess of Wix, whose boat sank in a storm as it crossed the normally placid lake between the two kingdoms. The storm, it said, was a sudden lethal confluence of freezing rain and gale-force winds. When Fog confronted them, dew scattered to the fields and wind whisked away. Frost, however, cackled proudly. That girl did you no harm, Fog told her. Such considerations, sneered Frost, have never troubled the gods, nor you, and so they shall not trouble me. Fog wrapped herself around her daughter. Nothing good can come of such rancor. You said yourself, nothing good will come to this house anyway. Frost spun out of her mother's embrace and eddied carelessly across the castle grounds. Why should a little storm make things worse? Have you not seen what the king does with his other son's brides? Frost went still for a moment. He will not bother me, she decided, and kept spinning. And you see honor in his seduction of the poorest young women of his kingdom? You want to be part of that lineage? Frost stopped again. I will freeze him out of their hearts. And once again she danced, whirling up and down the castle walls, leaving a fine coat of ice behind her. The prince, undeterred, kept writing letters to his fair seamstress in the village. Frost tried to intervene, but dew and wind feared Fog's wrath after what they'd done to the Princess of Wix, and they refused to help her again. Without their assistance, all Frost could do was make the trip uncomfortable for the messengers. Each day, the sun shone a little longer and warmer. Fog made no effort to shield her daughter from the heat, and eventually Frost gave up her efforts with the prince, preferring to spend her time in cooler climes north of the kingdom. As flowers bloomed and fresh grass surged up from the earth, letters flowed freely between the prince and his love in the village. The king finally relented to their engagement. They would be married in the fall. Frost stayed away from the kingdom of Twain all summer. She wouldn't even enter the same landmass. Fog could hardly blame her. Her daughter wouldn't have wanted to see the calligraphers penning invitations on thick parchment, messengers delivering the scrolls to castles far and wide, regal garments being sewn, or cows and pigs being fattened for the feast. The bride-to-be, so talented and industrious was she, sewed a velveteen suit for her father. She designed her own bridal gown, and was so modest she had to be talked into making it even more beautiful than the visions she had created for her mother and sisters. Jewelers, enchanted, showered her with diamonds and pearls, each one vying to be the one to bedeck the charming princess-to-be. No, thought Fog, it would have done her daughter no good at all to have witnessed any of this. Frost returned just before the wedding, but didn't last long amongst the flourishes of flutes and horns rehearsing. She barely had time to wilt a few flowers in the bride's bouquet before fleeing the flutter of bridesmaids' skirts. The flowers were quickly replaced, the guests' coaches arrived, and that afternoon, the humble village girl became a princess. The celebration reverberated across the kingdom. Cheers went up, mugs were raised, even the thriftiest farmer granted himself an extra portion of bread. There were, however, some dozens of huts where peasant girls silently raged over honor and promises broken. No matter how quietly they mourned, Fog heard them all. Over days and weeks, the headiness subsided and life in the kingdom returned to normal. The days grew shorter and cooler, and Frost returned. She looked into the prince's bedroom window once, then meticulously coated every rose in the queen's garden. The king grew restless with the increasingly longer nights. His new daughter-in-law could not be seduced, which emboldened his other sons' wives to refuse him as well. And so he turned back to the village. Not having his son's hand to barter, he turned to coercion. His messengers rode out from the castle with sinister bargains: a father in prison or a night with the king. If not you, your little sister. These weren't the worst horrors Fog had seen on Earth. What plagued her was that Frost couldn't stay away from the castle. Every morning, the palace minders had to chip away layers of ice from the windows and doors. Frost, darling, Fog said at last, why do you waste yourself on this wretched family? Frost dawdled, coating the flags on the castle spires until they crackled. Dew and wind sighed, accidentally snapping the fabric into shards. All right then, said Fog. Listen, all of you, I've got a plan. Fog whispered to Frost and Dew and Wind, whirling them up into her vision for the king. That night, a mysterious traveler approached the castle grounds. Her eyes shone like starlight from the shadows of her hood. She breezed past the drawbridge guards in her purple cloak, beguiling them with a coquettish smile. The guards at the entrance to the inner grounds bowed toward her swishing ebony skirts, opening the doors wide at her approach. She swept past footmen and attendants, halting them in attitudes of bewildered admiration. The traveler knew exactly where to go. She passed through the queen's garden of dead roses and mounted the thick stone steps to the private chambers. She found the king in his bedroom, lounging on a leather divan and reading a book of Norse myth. His footman had simply opened the door and stepped aside to let her enter. When questioned later, the footman would not be able to describe her concretely. He could only tell of her regal assurance, her utmost grace, and the oddly piercing chill wafting from her silken garb. He wouldn't be able to say why he was not alarmed when she closed the door behind her, shutting him out. He somehow felt, and this he revealed to no one, that something good and just was about to occur. The footman would describe the creak of leather, the click of the king's step across the room, heavy breathing and the rustle of skirts, the croaking joints of the sovereign's bed frame, and then a whoosh, a crackle, a crash, the cacophony of 1,000 mirrors breaking. The footman yanked open the door and rushed into a spinning cauldron of snow. The smoke of freshly extinguished candles stung his eyes. Curtains and bed linens whipped in the acrid wind. All the windows were shattered, and moonlight streamed in through gaping, empty arches, glinting off shards of glass embedded in sparkling snowdrifts. The king was nowhere to be seen. A massive search ensued, with baying dogs and knights on horseback. A week passed, then 2, then months. At a year, the queen announced the king's death. So refined and graceful was her mourning, it almost seemed like happiness. When her eldest son became king, he donated chests of gold to the village sanctuary, housing young women with children born outside of marriage. From that day forward, the kingdom of Twain was a place of endless spring, bathed in perpetual sunshine. Wind included the realm in his rounds, but Fog and her daughters, Frost and Dew, found their happiness in other lands. They glided and danced under crystalline northern skies. They undulated with auroras of pink and green, yellow and blue. They joined in many a hunt, riffling white fur, whistling through antlers, and winding around glistening fangs. They hung daggers from rooftops and watched them melt in the spring. Most nights were so dark and clear, Fog could look up and see the contours of her once familiar gods rolling above. She remembered the ages of sliding between them, over their skins, firming and diffusing, entering and being entered. Odin looked down at her briefly. Not long, but long enough. She would unfreeze their hearts again. One day, she knew, she would leave her daughters, hover over a sun-baked vineyard, and call out for Bacchus. He would reach out and breathe her in. Thank you.
That was just lovely. I loved everything about that story. Thank you so much. Tara Campbell, everybody, The Legend of Fog. Um, man, it is our custom here at Story Hour to just pause between readers, to just give a moment for the work to sort of breathe and resonate, and to sort of cleanse our mental palates to get ready for the next one. So we're going to do that. Just going to take a very brief moment. Tara Campbell, folks. Thank you, Tara. Our next author is Jean-Paul L. Garnier. He is the owner of Space Cowboy Books bookstore and publishing house. He's a producer of the Simultaneous Times podcast, which was 2023 Laureate Award winner, BSFA Ignite and British Fantasy Award finalist, and he's the editor of Starline magazine. He is also the deputy editor-in-chief of Worlds of If and Galaxy magazines. In 2024, Jean-Paul won the Laureate Award for Best Editor. He has written many books of poetry and science fiction, and we are delighted to have him back here at Story Hour. Jean-Paul, welcome. Welcome back. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dan and Laura. It's always an honor to be on your wonderful program. Tara, thank you for the story. Your work is always fabulous. I'm going to read a few short pieces of science fiction from my new collection from Shacklebound Books, Cardboard Spaceship. This story is called Come Back Earlier. And just a caveat for these, there is some violence and language in these stories. Come Back Earlier. I'd made a mess out of the whole damn thing. We never set out to fuck up, but more often than not, we do just that. In this case, the asinine element was my motivation to do good. Right the wrongs, I had cried, waving the flag of my own misguided morality. I was no stranger to screwing up, but it had been a long time since I had. My moral compass had been guiding me in the right direction ever since I woke up and realized that I'd been an asshole most of my life. Ever since that moment, I'd made a tremendous effort, slowly at first, until it became a habit to do the right thing and to be kind to everyone. Leaving judgment behind is a difficult thing until you're finished judging yourself. Your present self, that is. The old me would have to remain an asshole in the gutters of the past. At least that's what I thought for a long time, always critical of how I had lived my life. But in my strides towards self-improvement, I went back to school and tried to do all of the things that my younger, idiot self had claimed that he wanted to do. And it was all going rather well for a change. I was excelling in school. I had great friends. And it seemed at times that I was truly able to leave behind the life that I had lived full of regrets and self-loathing. I even smiled on a regular basis. Being kind and solid felt good. When you know your own boundaries, you tend to break those of others less frequently. Self-improvement indeed. In less than a decade, I'd gone from strung out deadbeat musician to the scientist I had dreamed of as being a boy. I even met a girl. That didn't pan out as well as some of my other attempts, yet happiness seemed to be within reach for the first time in my mostly unhappy life. When I got out of school, I got my first real job, one that I wasn't allowed to talk about. With my new set of values, it was hard to have to keep a secret from my friends and family, but I was working on real scientific problems, doing something meaningful for the first time in my life. Anyway, they understood, and no one held it against me, but they sure were curious and would often tease me about being a secret agent. Little did I know that that was in the cards too. Not espionage by any means, but clandestine, since we couldn't let the world know what we were up to. The government wanted it bad, and paid handsomely too. We knew that they would want to weaponize time travel, but our team couldn't let ourselves think about that. Not without a breakthrough on the way. Not with a breakthrough on the way. Not when we were so close to answering one of humankind's greatest questions. And we figured we would find a way to put safeguards in place or string the project out and keep our employers in the dark about the real power we had harnessed. So we thought. They were onto us. It wasn't their first rodeo. Instead of axing us all, they brought us deeper into the fold. At this point, we were expendable at best. They figured the best way to keep us from talking was to make us subjects in their clandestine time war. Their rationale was as follows. You made the machine, you do the dirty work. We agreed rather than have our baby stolen from us. And so, after all, through my attempts at self-improvement and attempts to do something constructive for the world, I was going to have to be an asshole again. Not for self-righteous reasons this time, but for what they called the greater good. Shit, I wasn't a spy and didn't think I was cut out for the job. But when I told them that, they started listing off all kinds of rotten things from my past, assuring me that I was exactly the kind of man they needed for the work at hand. And so I went back in time and did all kinds of horrible shit. Stuff I would have never thought to do on my own volition. I didn't even want to ask their reasons for some of the tasks they set me to. They wouldn't have told me their rationale anyway. Nor was I allowed to talk to anyone else on the team about what we were doing. The secrecy pained us. We had all set out to do something good, and now we were unfit soldiers in a secret time war. A war of which we did not know the reasons or possible outcomes. All my progress towards being a good human being was being undone. For the first time in years, I found myself loathing returning. My hatred of myself grew with every ill deed they bestowed upon me. This awful change inside was not the only effect of our tampering. The changes were subtle, almost imperceptible at first. More unhoused on the streets, things being more expensive, particularly food. They were the types of changes that we'd grown jaded to seeing, so it took me a while to catch on to the cause. There was no way to correlate our work to the things I was noticing, but my suspicions grew with each minor adjustment. Revelation snapped inside of me. Things would begin to change exponentially. No matter what the outcome, we didn't have the right to screw with the timelines and didn't know the half of what was really happening. We were creating alternate universes. Were we creating alternate universes by creating paradoxes? Did our current world actually change, or were we moving into new ones? No matter how it was going down, it couldn't be right. Everything inside me spoke up, screamed out that what we were doing was absolutely wrong, and it was my damned fault. I'd made a mess of everything, done things that my soul would not be forgiven for. It was beyond hurting people. I'd messed with the fabric of the cosmos itself. I hadn't learned anything. I'd been fooling myself that I understood what empathy meant. But through my self-loathing, the answer began to paint itself in lucid clarity, and the opportunity came. All they wanted of me this time was to divert a pedestrian and make sure that they crossed the street at a different intersection. Easy enough. Maybe they didn't want this guy hit by a car or something. Who knows? I'd stopped trying to understand their reasoning a long time ago. Little changes could have big effects, and bizarrely, big changes could sometimes result in similar outcomes. I stood on the street corner waiting for my mark, thinking about what I had become, then unbecome, then become again, as familiarity rose inside of me. The smell caught me first. A lackluster car wash on a filthy street corner boasting an old banner that read, "Re-Grand Opening," and had for years. The shriek of bus brakes, the holler of an old drunken veteran down on his luck. I was home. Home 20 years ago. A place I had never liked and fueled my poison like prison mentality. My eyes left my mark and traveled up to the second story of a building half a block down. A pirate flag swayed in the smog. The same Jolly Roger I had flown for years in my pitiful single room that served as a cell in those days. It flashed upon me, and I knew what to do. The door only needed a slight kick to open. I had never worried about forgetting my keys back then. I looked at the old, familiar mailbox overflowing with junk mail. The creak of the steps brought back waves of memories. Times I had to drunkenly crawl up the 2 flights. The swagger of striding up them for the first time to my first place without roommates. The nostalgia evaporated as I passed by a one-time neighbor that acknowledged me but never looked up to see how much older I was. It was easy to believe that decades hadn't happened. I was getting distracted. I had to end this atrocity now. There was no way I could take down the corrupt government that had caused me to blaspheme against causality, but there was something I could do. That kid sitting in that apartment was going to cause all of this someday, and I had to take him out before he did. Apartment 108. I was about to knock, then tried the handle instead. I rarely locked the door in those days. That is, if this was before I had my guitar stolen. Apparently it was. The door swung open, and I saw him sitting there on the small couch in the far corner. A draft of swag weed and cigarettes circled the room. He, or I, didn't even look up as I entered. I knocked the needle off the record on the turntable. I had long since bored of T-Rex. Only then did he look up. His eyes darkened to shark hue. He got up slowly, looking at me funny the whole time. The look on my face couldn't have been much different. But I was also looking around the room, taking in all of the details I had long since forgotten. I knew I was going to kill him, but I hadn't considered how. As he stood up in front of me, I realized that I also hadn't considered how different we were. He was a good 60 pounds lighter and mean. Unafraid, he advanced slowly. I stared like a fool. I knew everything about him. He couldn't possibly recognize me and didn't give a damn who I was. I had invaded his space. Still a pet peeve of mine. He had that look of someone fed up, of someone who had encountered this situation before. And I remembered that indeed he had. My palms clammed up. I hadn't taken into account that I was much more fit in those days, or that he was steeped in violence in those days and would be ready for me. I lunged and he gracefully evaded me. I fell into the couch he had just risen from as a cold wave of pain rose up from my back from a solid kidney shot. Damage flashed behind my eyes and my stomach turned. I spun around and met his hard gaze. He was smiling, but it fell away as my fist found his solar plexus. Breath rushed out of him, but he wouldn't go down. He parried with a quick 1-2. I tasted blood coming from my nose. This little bastard had no idea of the damage he would do. The wounds he was inflicting were nothing compared to his future. my past. My rage melted into clarity. I landed a jab on his mouth. Again, he just smiled, bringing a knee up into my ribs, which audibly cracked. Now, I couldn't breathe, and he took full advantage. My mouth opened and closed, but took in no air. I keeled over, and I barely saw his signature uppercut coming. Then stars. Vision returned, first as a dot in the center of the blackness, then fading in slowly. He stood above me silently. I grabbed the back of his knee and pulled him down on top of me. We rolled in death embrace, hands on each other's throats. I released my grip and returned the favor of the kidney blaster. He grunted as his eyes sharpened. I struck again in the same spot and could taste the possibility of besting him. In that moment, my confidence clouded my judgment. Could I really beat my younger, harder self? I looked into his eyes and I saw the bafflement of recognition. He mouthed something, but no words came out. Then he brought crashing down his forehead. I'm going to change pace a little bit here. This is a cyberpunk story called Frogger. If anyone doesn't know what a Frogger is, this scared the crap out of me when I learned about it. It's someone that lives in your house without you knowing about it. Through a crack in the plaster, I watched him jack in. Telltale twitch of the legs as juice surged through the plug in his neck into the body. Probably 2 hours of free reign. If, that is, this was part of the daily routine and not just a random stop in for a quick shop or spank or whatever it is he does in there. I made my way through the crawl space and into the kitchen. Have to eat while you can. I heard him stir and I froze. Was it a short one this time? No, just another kick. He must be getting a good jolt in there. Yep, it'll be an hour at least. Looking in 2 directions, I kept an eye on him in the living room. Smear peanut butter on toast. The look on his face, when he finds the empty jar, is priceless every time. Keep it coming, boy. Food ate, I move into the living room, sit next to him. I need to jack in too. It'll have to wait till he sleeps. Last time I went in too, almost forgot to get him out before. Got lost in Chrissy's dive. Easy to do in that shit pit of vipers and pleasure. Chrissy had me all juiced up, blanking hard, eyes all white. Would have spaced too, stayed past my welcome. Saw him come in and bounced in a hurry, still fogged up. But just in time not to have to face him. It'd be like a mirror of ugly, scent all familiar, but no face he could place. A ghost riding him somewhere in the back of his head. An artifact of the cable jacking him. So he'd think anyway. Fled quickly, too. Got out in time to see him twitch from the fog. But he never guessed he had a Frogger. But here I am looking for the milk all lips smack and smug, waiting for my turn on the inside. I'd worried he'd followed me to Chrissy's, but how could that be? Gotta tell Chrissy to watch out for him. If he echoes, I'm fucked. We're close enough as it is. Can't get too close. If he echoes and we merge, can't go there. I'll be toast. Maybe I gotta find a new place to get fogged up. Old faves always dying on me. Frogger life, you know. Been thinking on this too long. Back to the wall before he turns. I do love the moments of mobility. Not as good as the inside, but he does have PB, for now at least. Consider taking the jar with me, but he might forget to get more if it isn't in his face. Reminder of jacked forgetfulness. Hangover's the only thing that returns with you, especially if you've been at Chrissy's. One more spoon, and I'm back at the crack, watching out at him, looking for signs of return. He's all sweat and quiet. Don't know where else he goes, but judging by the beads on his face, he likes it heavy. One of these days, he'll stay in, stop with the rent. On the streets, I'll be looking for a new mark. Always takes too long. Fog starts lifting, and I'm in trouble. Here he comes. Got back in the wall just in time. Again. Have to suppress a fit of coughing when I see him. It's been too long since I was in. Sleep, you motherfucker. He won't, though. It'll be hours yet. He heads to the PB. Priceless look as he spins the lid back to the almost empty jar. Stands back in front of the fridge, all sweats, trying to cool off. Sleep, buddy. That'll work. But he doesn't. Goes to the living room again and eyes the jack. Oh, come on. My turn already. Knows it's a bad idea and he still does it. Surge is quieter this time as he jacks. No twitch. Fog's got him. Fine, you shit. The PB's mine. Gotta stave off the ache somehow. I could sleep standing up if I gotta stay in the wall too long. If he gets on the ride, it's gonna be a long night for me. I'll join him in the sweats. I could creep out again, but maybe he's just in for another sweet taste. If he sleeps on me, I'm fucked. What a waste of in time. Brother, you don't know how good you've got it. Your Frogger shadow can't hold out forever. Hours later, I'm moving past urgent. He's sleeping on me, hands all dangling, not bothering to wipe anymore. Out as can be. Gonna have to risk the echo if it goes on. Hours pass. Fuck it, I'm jacking in. He's still on the couch, sweat dripping. He must have found a good place. I'd follow if it weren't for the echo risk. Must be a good one, though. Typically, he drops out, 2 hours max. Jitters are coming. I could roll him like a sleeping dog. Gotta remember who's fronting the bill. Hard to care at this point. If it's fog, someone's got a new batch. Can almost smell it coming off of him. Worth the risk? If he's on one, like I think, he won't be keeping this place for long. Moving anyway? Probably worth it. No place to jack, though. Jitters get in charge. See ya, Judgment. Sitting down next to him again, almost like the dreaded echo. Hard to care this far out of the inside. Little spasms knock me back to the room. He's quivering good. It looks good, too. Auxiliary jack in hand. Pause, but the decision is on me. Fog looks good, too. In. Down at Chrissy's. Hollers inform me the night's going. Juicers all over. Music thump. I fog up. Chrissy's dripping in the good stuff. Clouds come on, all sweet and right. My usual hour, but never sitting right next to him, all couched up and oblivious. Thick fog. Definitely a new batch. Music morphs into muscle at this stage. Flow, you fucker. Easy to forget the outworld. He walks in. Hard to believe he's walking. Even with the sweat. Must juice as hard as me. Wouldn't know in the domestic. Fucker walks steady, too. Looking at Chrissy, she's got no advice. Wouldn't know anyway. He's all mirror and fear. For me, at least. Fog's thick, killing all care. Nod takes the time. I drip back to Chrissy's. He's sitting at my table, hard stare, sweat all beating. I know you. Voice all syrupy smooth. Nope. Trying not to see. Fog's got me locked into the chair as the echo starts chiming in the bad way. My mouth might as well be all peanut buttered out. Real world spilling. It gets bad. Cascade. Hard to see through the mist growing all the time. No echo yet. He keeps asking questions. Sweat my answers. No, no, no. Sure I don't know you? He must be smelling the echo coming. Paralysis answers. You got a face just like mine. Mirror starts sphering. Not good. If I speak, things get worse. Start sputtering in the bad way. Syllable salad pours out. 2 guys, 1 jack. No bueno. Hurts when the mirror starts circling. He's got nothing but confusion on it. Probably never heard of froggers. Met one up close. Not good. Bad for both, but he ain't worrying because he don't know. Can't know. Can't tell him either. Words make it worse. But that mirror curving in on me says it's too late, motherfucker. You, I think he's smelling PB on me. Confusion thick as fog, but not feeling good. Starting. He's me, or thinks he is. The curve gets worse, total fold. Not good, but can't put it into words. He says something, hears himself. I can't. Don't touch me. He come through now. It's not touching him. I'm not touching him, but it started. His words finding my lips, beads synchronize. In the wall, I was safe. Now, Chrissy's is burning. Our minds touch the flame. Just us. Everyone else, fog jacked, perfect obliviousness. You. He mouthed the words peanut butter, almost connecting, but not enough bandwidth. You, 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 you. Coming on strong, the echo lifts the fog in a bad way. He jacks, and I'm stuck. My body is all his now, at his mercy. Frog can't hop. Don't know what he sees on the outside, but Chrissy's is nothing but a wall of fire. Smoke takes over fog. I'm coughing. Looking down, I see ribs snapping. He's onto me. Too late to unjack. If only for fog I could deal. Back of the neck stings, hurts, feels pulled. Sphere mirror infinity of bad. Inside can't last, but curves forever. A little druggy cyberpunk for you. I'm going to finish with just a very brief piece here, very short. We were talking before the show about loving epistolary work, and this is an off-the-record letter to the people watching back home. And this one has sexual themes. Everyone knows that it takes a long time to get anywhere traveling through space. Even at light speed, the trips are long. You see pictures of us spinning in circles, catching floating globes of water. You think that's all we do? Now you imagine us standing around consoles, turning knobs and watching blinking lights. Geez, you've seen too many movies. How many hours of the day do you think we spend on that kind of crap? Well, I can tell you, while I have turned some knobs and flicked some switches in my life, computers are better suited for this work. We're mostly here to prove it's possible. So, to see if we can really leave and eventually stay somewhere, we look for paradise in the ever-greatening darkness. Anyway, we still have lives and do regular stuff. In fact, much of our days are much like yours, with the exception that we probably put in more hours. The main difference is that there's no privacy. Tight quarters at best. The endless noise of the machine covers up voices if you let it, but we're almost never outside of visual contact with each other. The TV's fond of saying that we eat together, that bonding at mealtime and close proximity is good for the psyche. That's the TV-friendly version anyway. Yeah, we do that, but that's not all. We can leave for the stars, but we can't leave human needs behind. We bring all that stuff with us. What do you see in your mind's eye now? I'll bet all of a sudden you started thinking about spaceflight as boring. Obviously, you don't know us very well. Don't worry, it's not your fault. The propaganda, the radio dispatches they let you hear, and those dumb films of us eating water out of the sky, yeah, it all makes us look pretty apple pie. You really think that would work? It wouldn't. While our daily activities are much the same as yours, we can't go anywhere, and there is no privacy. I can see you shuddering now. For us, it's no problem. The solution was simple. Our crew, and they don't want you to know this, is polyamorous. We're all exhibitionists and voyeurs. The lack of privacy can be a real turn on. And when we're done twiddling knobs for education videos, we're busy with a healthy and vigorous sex life. Don't feel like joining in? Go ahead and watch. And now you're seeing million dollar money shots in your head. Calm down. Strict protocol for stuff like that. But we're active. Wouldn't you be if you had so much time to kill? None of the crew discriminate much. Keeps us from getting bored or developing resentments. A little of this, a little of that. But you won't see that in the films. They don't want you to know that your tax dollars lead to so much fun, and all without American values. After all, we're about as far from America as you can get. Thank you so much.
Jean-Paul Garnier, everybody, with 3 really wonderful stories. Thank you very much, Jean-Paul. This has been the Fog edition of Story Hour, I think. So I want to thank both of our authors, Tara Campbell, Jean-Paul Garnier, for a really great evening. Also want to thank my co-host, Laura Blackwell, and all of you. If you are returning Story Hour visitors, I'm really glad you could join us again. If this has been your first time, I hope you really enjoyed yourself, and I hope you come back. Because next week, we're really happy to have Danye Coles and L.E. Daniels. So we're really looking forward to that. And until then, good night.
Good night.